Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Recently, we asked some people about sharing their New York Times accounts.
My name is Dana. I am a subscriber to the New York Times, but my husband isn't. And it would be really nice to be able to share a recipe or an article or compete with him in Wordle or Connections. Thank you.
Dana, we heard you. Introducing the New York Times Family Subscription. One subscription, up to 4 separate logins for anyone in your life. Find out more at nytimes.com/family.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. Serious questions are mounting about President Donald Trump's decision to bomb a small boat in the Caribbean Sea, killing all 11 people on board. The administration says these were drug cartel members transporting drugs that posed a threat to the United States, but many legal experts have concluded the bombing might have been illegal or possibly a war crime. And this saga is getting darker. Senator Tim Kaine and 24 other Democratic senators just released a bombshell of a letter laying out sharply drawn questions about the situation for the administration, and we're told that Kaine reached out to Republicans to get their signatures on the letter, but none would, which is appalling. New information has also come out about the strike that makes it all look even worse. We're unraveling all this with Scott Anderson, a senior editor at Lawfare and author of a great new piece analyzing the legality of the strike. Scott, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So here's where we are. On September 2nd, Trump announced that he'd ordered the sinking of this boat, supposedly carrying what they call narco-terrorists, all linked to Tren de Aragua, which the administration has designated a terrorist organization. Congress has not authorized this. The only legal authority the administration seems to be claiming is inherent constitutional power as commander-in-chief. Scott, can you sum up what we know about the facts here?
Yeah, absolutely. What we're aware of is that on September 2nd, the United States, through what appears to be by some reporting a drone strike, although we're not 100%, I don't think I've seen that officially confirmed anywhere, targeted a small boat with 11 people on board that the administration has described as positively identified, that's the language they use, members of Tren de Aragua, killing all 11 members. The boat was initially said at various points to be headed to the United States. There was some flip-flopping on that by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who suggested at one point it might head to the United States, then wasn't so sure about it. There have been conflicting accounts since then with people who've analyzed the type of boat, the amount of fuel it holds, the direction it was headed in, subsequent reporting suggesting that, in fact, it wasn't clearly headed to the United States, or perhaps that it had even turned around after detecting it was being surveilled by U.S. military aircraft of some sort. We saw President Trump parrot what looks to be a fair amount of more formal Defense Department information, judging for some of the vernacular and acronyms used on his Truth Social platform, saying essentially positively identified 11 members of TDA were killed, used lethal force, no service members or U.S. people killed on the ground, which doesn't really apply here because it obviously wasn't on the ground, but making the point that this was in fact a deliberate use of lethal force at his direction, and attaching a video which one can watch with about a 30-second clip of the attack taking place.
So let's talk about the legal justification. The administration released a document claiming this constitutional authority as commander-in-chief, but it seems to me the core point here is that presidents have often asserted this kind of Article 2 authority to do limited strikes, provided they don't rise up to the level of a major war or something. Many presidents have done this, Democrats and Republicans. But as you wrote in your piece, Trump here is vastly expanding this authority by using it to kill civilians, albeit ones convicted of crimes, correct?
That's what it appears to be, certainly. The president has argued that these people, because they are engaged in narcotics trafficking and migrant trafficking, both of which the president has framed as attacks on the United States, that they are effectively engaged in hostilities against the United States the same way Al-Qaeda or a terrorist group or some other entity might be in using more conventional violence. But it's a really controversial view. That is not a view that international law generally, in the eyes of most of the countries in the world, would take, even as the United States usually applies international law in the context of armed conflict, which usually adopts more forgiving standards than much of the world. Even under those standards, it's a pretty novel proposition and a problematic one. And then perhaps most importantly, those standards in international law are actually pulled into U.S. criminal law. And there are U.S. criminal statutes that could apply to this sort of conduct overseas. There are usually implicit exceptions in them for actions that are legitimate acts of war, but it's not clear that these things fall within those because they are so far outside the zone of what is usually done in an armed conflict.
Trump is essentially claiming the authority to redefine drug traffickers and traffickers of migrants as war combatants, and then saying he has the Article 2 constitutional authority to order them killed as war combatants, correct?
That is what it appears to be, yes.
Well, the thing about that, though, is who decides whether the president has the power to redefine civilians as war combatants in that way?
It's a hard question. If it depends on what the context is in which it's arising. And part of the issue with all of this is that these sorts of action by presidents very rarely get subjected to judicial review. That's why there's so much ambiguity and uncertainty about the limits of the president's authority, about the relative constitutional authority of president versus Congress in the use of military force. Courts have resisted intervening and weighing in on those questions, and not many people are usually in a circumstance to raise litigation and bring it to U.S. courts. So the president usually gets to operate on his understanding of the law, however favorable it may be to his position, until he runs up against one of those legal limits, and they don't come around very often.
The essence of this is that Trump is vastly expanding his authority beyond what other presidents have done by claiming that he can simply redefine these civilians, albeit ones suspected of crimes again, as war combatants and then kill them.
That is, I think, a reasonable understanding of what's happening. I will say there is the alternate view, right? And I do think it's worth putting it out there. They will say this is what happened after 9/11. And that people made many of these same criticisms when the Bush administration, the Obama administration targeted terrorist groups. And there was a long period where a lot of people argued in good faith, hey, we don't think we should treat terrorist groups as if we're at war with them. That's criminal activity, even if it is violent. Most of the international community, I would say, and certainly the kind of consensus view of the United States and lawyers and policymakers in the United States, has grifted towards the view that, yeah, you can be in an armed conflict with a non-state armed group like Al-Qaeda, but that's because they are actively attacking you. They are actively using hostilities and violence against you.
Right. On this boat, these guys are not waging war on the United States, whereas Al-Qaeda is waging war on the United States.
Exactly. It's certainly not the way we've understood war to be in the past. The president's redefining what war is to say war can encompass the large-scale trafficking of narcotics and, again, migrants is also part of the rhetoric and statements he's said regarding Tren de Aragua.
To stay up to date on all the news that you need to know, there's no better place than right here on the DSR Network. And there's no better way to enjoy the DSR Network than by becoming a member. Members enjoy an ad-free listening experience, access to our Discord community, exclusive content, early episode access, and more. Use code DSR2025 for a 25% off discount on sign up at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's code DSR2025 at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. Thank you and enjoy the show.
So Senator Tim Kaine and 24 Democrats released a letter to Trump asking pointed questions about the legality of the strike. For instance, they asked, did the administration do a serious legal assessment of Trump's authority here? They asked, what intelligence did you have identifying these people as drug runners? They ask, what legal authority do you have to kill civilians, including ones suspected of crimes? And the senators say, did you analyze whether these military forces could simply have intercepted the boat, boarded it, and arrested those on board? Was there some reason you didn't do that, Mr. President? And so forth. Scott, what did you think of the questions in this letter?
They're good questions, and they are very clearly targeted towards breaking down the legal argument that the Trump administration has put forward in support of this. They're poking at the weak points of it. That last point you make about the ability to intercept really goes to the heart of the matter. Under really most potentially applicable legal frameworks, whether it's international human rights law or the law of armed conflict, which depending on whether you see this as a war, different standards will apply. Under either one, if there was a realistic capability of simply intercepting or stopping this vessel without killing people on board, that is the route you should have taken. The only way it would be even remotely approachably acceptable to kill everyone on board when it's not strictly necessary to stop the transition of vessels if you treat each of them as if they are armed combatants, basically enemy soldiers in the field. And that is, again, a very, very, specific status that traditionally the U.S. military and the United States have only applied to clearly defined individuals and have worked really hard to separate those people from civilians, even civilians who are doing bad things or criminal things.
Well, right. And here basic morality comes into play. Why not board the boat? This is something that is constantly done. It is a routine act by our military to interdict and board boats of this nature, arrest the people on board, collect them for questioning, which can actually be valuable. And instead, Trump just said, blow them up. It seems to me that as a moral question as well as a legal one, they really should explain, why didn't they just board the damn thing and take the people on it if they found drugs on this boat and confirm that they were Tren de Aragua or drug smugglers, arrest them, right?
Certainly there's an argument there. There's a lot of advantages you could gain from intelligence, from interrogating people. You could confirm they were TDA members doing it at the behest of the Maduro regime, if that is what's happening, as alleged. You would have a lot more information about what's actually happening. You sacrifice all of that when you use lethal force and you destroy the underlying property, as appears to have happened in this case.
Well, a Senate staffer tells me that in regard to this letter, Senator Tim Kaine, who spearheaded it, reached out to a number of Republican senators in hopes that they would sign on and make the letter bipartisan, but that none of these Republicans would join. I find that just reprehensible. Do these Republican senators really not want answers to any of these questions? What's your takeaway from that, Scott?
I'm a little surprised, to be honest, because there are a number of Republican senators that have taken pretty strong stances on particularly use of force issues, including in opposition to the Trump administration. We think back to resolutions that passed through the War Powers Resolution special procedures during the first Trump administration about Yemen and about Iran. A number of them had bipartisan support. And in this case, we've seen at least one Republican senator, Rand Paul, actually be really quite vocal in criticizing Vice President Vance and members of the administration for statements they made around this and been very critical of this action. So I'm surprised at least he wasn't on board. Maybe he wasn't one of the Republican senators asked. But Senator Kaine has a long history of being very effective at working across the aisle with a number of other senators, Republican senators, who really care like he does about these use of force issues. And it's disappointing that he wasn't able to get any of them on board with this letter.
And look, let's face it, these Republican senators just don't want their names on something that can be perceived as critical of Donald Trump. And they will just simply take their duty as senators to exercise oversight in these situations and just throw it out the window.
That's a possibility. I hope not. And I'm hoping more questions are coming out through the back scenes. And that does happen in these cases. You know, you do have the offices of certain Republican senators that are much more willing to push back on the administration in quiet ways now than they are publicly. And it does happen. Maybe that is happening. But some additional questions do need to be asked and information needs to be garnered about this case because it's a very troubling case. Even though it's just one incident, so far freestanding, involving a relatively small number of people, although it certainly matters for the lives of those involved and their family members, it is still a big precedent and a really problematic one. And if Congress doesn't push back on this, it's going to create a hole that can only be opened broader and can lead to further derogation of congressional authority in favor of presidential authority.
In fact, to underscore your point, they've all been saying, administration officials, Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, they've all been saying this is just the beginning. We're going to do this a lot more. So for Congress to just kind of go to sleep, or Republicans in Congress to just go to sleep, the majority just saying, go ahead and do whatever the hell you want, seems really, really not ideal.
No, I mean, the main check, the thing to bear in mind about all of this is that the reason why courts have been so resistant to getting involved in checking the president's authority is because they usually look at the facts in front of them. And dating all the way back to Vietnam, they've said, well, we don't see any real signs that Congress is opposed to what's happening. And we're only going to intervene if we see really a conflict between the political branches. There, even the Roberts Court has said, there we actually think we want to intervene. And we even have people like Justice Kavanaugh, which before he ascended to the court said, in those situations, I think Congress wins 90% of the time. But Congress has to act to do that. And if you don't have Congress willing to enact limitations and express contrary views, then the courts aren't going to get involved and there isn't going to be a really substantive, meaningful check in the near term.
Absolutely. So just to close this out, there's been another dark turn in this saga. The New York Times' Charlie Savage reports that the boat appears to have turned around before the attack started because the people on board saw a military aircraft coming. That's sourced to American officials briefed on the details. This badly undercuts the idea that a summary execution of these people in the Caribbean Sea was necessary. What in your view is the significance of that news?
It's very significant because, again, if your argument is that these people were engaged in hostilities against the United States, they're threatening the United States with what they're doing, there has to be a proximate relationship between what they're doing and harm in the United States. If these were drugs not even bound for the United States, that relationship gets way, way, way more attenuated. Again, it's hard to say what exactly the legal argument the administration is relying on here. But for most of the ones they could rely on, most of the ones you can hypothesize and envision, this really undercuts them really quite badly. And it's, again, one of those big facts that it would be great to get Congress to drill down on and pin them down on so that they know in future cases the administration will exercise some constraint when they encounter circumstances like this and not see it as an open door.
So where's this going? It seems to me that the administration is refusing to share intelligence detailing how they even know that these people were drug runners in Tren de Aragua in the first place. You've got the majority in both houses of Congress essentially shrugging at this news. Are we going to ever get any insight into what actually happened here?
It's a good question. I will say diligent reporting, congressional oversight, and frankly, often discontent among the military and the executive branch in these sorts of cases often does lead to information coming out, as we're already beginning to see. We know a lot more about what happened now than we did a week ago, and we're going to know more a week or two from now. For us from the outside, it is going to be unconfirmed reports. We're not going to have a 100% clear picture. We're going to have more facts. That's going to put more pressure on the administration to actually address what happened and provide an actual more satisfying narrative. Maybe they never will, and they'll never feel the political pressure to do that, but that's going to undermine their potential support for this action in the future, I think. So we see pushback. There are mechanisms in place here, but they're long-term trends. If the president wanted to do this tomorrow, could he? Yes, he could do the exact same thing again. And that's not going to change until you see legislative action of some sort or some other congressional action that prods the courts into play to start setting some constraints on president's authority or someone else's authority.
Scott Anderson, thanks for coming on, man. That was really enlightening stuff.
Thanks for having me.